When it comes down to renders of Mario characters, which one do you like? Nintendo 64 era, GameCube era, Wii era, Wii U era, Switch era? Personally, I like the GameCube and Switch era ones the most. I also like the Wii ones too, but one of my favorites has to be the Nintendo 64 renders. Sure, they're not as high quality as the future renders are now, but honestly, I think the Nintendo 64 era renders have some charm to them. I like that Mario was given a much darker skin tone, made him feel more Italian, and made him look less like a white guy. Also, I think that most of the Nintendo 64 renders look pretty good for their time. They accurately reflect the characters they're trying to reflect. The only N64 era render that I don't like is Luigi, mainly because I think he looks just like a green clone of Mario, and that's not all too great. Mainly because Luigi is not supposed to look similar to Mario. He's supposed to be slightly like Mario, but very much different at the same time. And with how the Nintendo 64 era Luigi looks too much like Mario, it's a bit disappointing. But, anyways, I love the Nintendo 64 era renders. I like the darker color schemes, the plastic design and look to them. It looks great and makes for some charming stuff. I'd love to see a Mario game done with those renders. Which, well, thanks to Render 96, we have Super Mario 64 with actual models that look like the in-game promotional artwork. But anyways, one thing else I like about the Nintendo 64 era renders is Bowser. Bowser probably looked the coolest out of all of them, mainly because his render was not a bright yellow, but was instead a dark shade of orange. And honestly, I liked Arc Orange Bowser. I still love Yellow Bowser, no problem. Yellow Bowser is probably a much more cooler and iconic, but I think that Orange Bowser is honestly still cool in his own right. Makes him look intimidating and makes him feel more like an actual villain or a threat. Like I said, nothing against Yellow Bowser. Yellow Bowser is clearly the one that is much more iconic. But I will always love Orange Bowser just for the fact that he looks so intimidating, and the fact that Nintendo 64 era Bowser was portrayed as a menacing threat. Not saying that the later games don't portray him as a menacing threat. He's clearly a threat in most of the newer games. But what I mean is, Bowser used to be pretty intimidating during the Nintendo 64 era, and that's what I kind of miss. I miss when Bowser used to be a scary monster, but also a goofy villain at the same time. I'd rather he be a mixture of both. A sinister threat, but also a villain that's goofy enough to not get too dark. I'm not saying make Bowser a complete killing machine or whatever. I'm not saying for Bowser to suddenly start committing bloodshed on the Mushroom Kingdom. What I mean is, Bowser should be portrayed as if he's an intimidating threat. And by that, I mean do stuff besides just capture the princess, which he has done in other games, like in Super Mario Galaxy. He practically destroys half of the Mushroom Kingdom and rips apart Peach's castle out of the ground. But all that aside, Bowser was pretty cool in the Nintendo 64 era. He was this sinister, menacing threat, but also a goofy villain in his own right, especially in the Mario sports games where he showed up and just wanted to play a friendly round of tennis, golf, and other stuff like that. But Nintendo 64 era Bowser was probably the coolest Bowser of all, and some of the coolest things about the Nintendo 64 era are the plastic look of the characters. I like that they look like plastic toys in the old Nintendo 64 renders. I like the darker color choices is done for the characters, and I like how they look. They look pretty amazing overall. Except Luigi, like I said, mainly because Luigi during the Nintendo 64 days looked too much like a green Mario rather than his own character, so that kind of sucks. But most of the other renders looked absolutely great, and I'd love to see a Mario game done with those renders, or some merchandise based off of those renders, or even I'd love to see a Mario animation made with those renders. mainly because I think that the renders for the Nintendo 64 era were peak and were pretty awesome. Especially Bowser, like I said a couple of times throughout this video. I like Bowser mainly because I think he looks more intimidating than in future entries, but even though he still is intimidating in in action and in character, he doesn't exactly look as intimidating as he once was. And that's the thing. I think Bowser should be made scary again, and they should make a game where Bowser is just, more of a sinister threat to the Mushroom Kingdom rather than just being this incredibly goofy villain. Don't get me wrong, I love goofy villains. If I didn't love goofy villains, I wouldn't have loved Skeletor from He-Man Masters of the Universe. I wouldn't have loved Robotnik from Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog if I didn't like goofy villains. And I like goofy villains. But I like it when villains like Bowser and Eggman are portrayed as legitimate sinister threats that are actually a problem for the protagonists of the story. Mainly because I think that Bowser and Eggman seem like actual threats considering what their plans are. Eggman plans on building an empire that's totalitarian, while Bowser plans on ruling a monarch's kingdom and taking it over by forcefully invading a population of the country and kidnapping its ruler, preventing her any at all chance to restore her kingdom to peace. And I'd like to see Bowser just is done scary again because he looks scary in the Nintendo 64 renders. Well, not that scary, but I mean like he looks intimidating is what I mean. But yeah, I like the Nintendo 64 era renders mainly because I like the plastic look of them, some of the darker color choices, and I just like how they look in general. They look very great. And I hope to see a game with the Mario 60 and Nintendo 64 era renders, mainly because it would be great to see a Mario game made with those renders. Anyways, that's all I have to say.